Hi guys, it is me, Chazza and welcome to another Grand Prix weekend in 2024. It is the 11th, I believe, Grand Prix weekend of the 2024 season. The Austrian Grand Prix, the Red Bull Ring, a Grand Prix that normally is never, I would say, boring. We've had some great Grand Prix here in the past, and it always is in at least qualifying very close and competitive. With some of the races, though, sometimes can be a bit one-sided, as we've seen in the last few years. But qualifying today, after what we saw yesterday in sprint qualifying, does promise us a fight, definitely, for pole position between two different teams, Red Bull and McLaren. And it's been a decent weekend so far. Obviously, a sprint weekend it's been, and thankfully, all of the sprint stuff is over and done with. Sprint qualifying was yesterday. I'll get into the results of that yesterday because obviously the results of sprint qualifying gives us a very good indication as to where people are going to be probably today, because the weather conditions are not really that different. I think it's even hotter today than it was yesterday, but again, in terms of the weather conditions itself, it's not very different at all. So, yeah, we'll get into the results of those soon enough. The sprint race did happen and finished, about 2 hours ago now? We'll get into that in a moment, and I'll go through, what happened in that sprint in just a moment and how the result of the sprint affects the championship going forward. But yeah, hope you guys are doing well, of course, after this Spanish Grand Prix, which was a decent weekend. The race didn't quite turn out to be what we hoped, but maybe we'll get a bit of a better race and just race weekend this weekend at the Red Bull Ring. But yeah, I hope you guys are doing well, no matter what time zone you're in, part of the world you're from. Hope you're all having as best time as possible. And I hope you'll be joining me in hopefully enjoying a great fight for pole position between, most likely, again, Red Bull and McLaren, and most likely Max Verstappen and Lando Norris, who have been closely engaged in battle so far this weekend. So yeah, we'll get into sprint qualifying later, but firstly, let's go through what happened in the sprint race itself. So Max Verstappen ended up winning the sprint by I think 5 seconds or so from Oscar Piastri in second place, and then in third it was Lando Norris. Fourth, George Russell. Fifth, Carlos Sainz. Sixth, Lewis Hamilton. Seventh, Charles Leclerc. Eighth was Sergio Perez. And obviously, eighth place is the final points paying position in the sprint. So all the top teams taking the points in the sprint. And the main fight was the fight early on in the first few laps between the two McLarens and Max Verstappen. Lando was getting pretty close to Max in those first few laps. And then, can't remember what lap it was. Again, it was in those first few laps, but Lando dived down the inside of Max Verstappen whilst running in second place. Dived down the inside of Verstappen, just about got the lead, and then, luckily for Lando, had DRS then down to turn 3, and I thought, surely Lando's going to hold on to this because he's got that DRS advantage, but Verstappen got right in the slipstream of Lando down to turn 3, and then, stupidly, and even I think Lando said it was an amateur mistake after the sprint itself, Lando sacrificed the inside line to Max Verstappen, who dived back down the inside, took the lead, and then Lando, because he was having to get out of the way of Max, Oscar, his teammate, then came through and took second place, going round the outside at turn 5, I think it was. And then Oscar ended up finishing in second place with Lando only third. So yeah, McLaren maybe could have won the sprint. I don't think they would have. I think even if Lando had gone ahead of Max and stayed ahead at turn 3, or turn 4 actually, not turn 3. I think even if Lando had stayed ahead, I think Max would have got back past, because I think the Red Bull in clear air is the faster car around this track, just about than the McLaren. And the Red Bull car has a lot more straight line speed than the McLaren car. So, with Max in the slipstream of Lando, I don't see how Max was not going to get back into the lead at some point. Obviously, he just did it a lot quicker than I was expecting, or most people probably were expecting. So, good fight. It was a good fight, but again, Lando, an amateur mistake, sacrificing the inside line to Max Verstappen and making it a lot easier for Max than it really had to be. And really, that was all that happened in the sprint. We got a couple decent overtakes at the start, but again, other than that fight at the start, it wasn't really that great of a sprint race, I have to say. And yeah, hopefully, with qualifying later in just over an hour and 20 minutes, Red Bull and McLaren will be that close once again, fighting out for pole position, and we will see whether McLaren could respond to, I wouldn't say a failure from earlier, but a bit of a disappointment from earlier, given how good they were looking early on in that sprint. But yeah, that was the sprint race. Before, though, we get onto the championship standings and how they are looking now after the sprint, just wanted to say quickly, there is a poll running as usual at the top of the live chat, and I've asked you guys, who do you think will take pole position for the Austrian Grand Prix? And your options are Max Verstappen, Lando Norris, Oscar Piastri, and George Russell. Out of those four, who do you think takes pole position? Of course, I'll let you know in a few moments who I think will take pole position. But yeah, let's get on to the championship standings. So Max Verstappen is now, I think 72 points clear of Lando Norris. Let me just, I'm not sure if I can do it off the top of my head right now, but I think it's either 71 or 72 points between Max and Lando now. And I know there are certain people out there still saying that there is a championship battle on. I don't see how anyone can really say that at this point. Max is just too far ahead, and he is not going to give up a 70-point plus lead in the championship. So yeah, Norris in second place, a few points further ahead, though, of Leclerc, who is in third. And Leclerc not had a great weekend so far. It doesn't look like it's going to get really any better going forward this weekend, because Ferrari are in trouble, as I'll get onto later on. Carlos Sainz fourth in the championship, Perez in fifth. Oscar Piastri does close the gap a bit, though, to Perez and Sainz ahead of him. So Piastri sixth, but only, 18 points away from Perez in fifth. So Piastri probably will pass Perez in the championship, probably by the time we get done with the British Grand Prix, I'd say next weekend. And then George Russell 7th, only 8 points behind Piastri. And then Hamilton 8th, Alonso 9th, and Yuki Tsunoda in P10. So the Drivers' Championship standings are exactly the same. And the same goes for the Constructors. Red Bull are 63 points clear, I believe, of Ferrari, which is not really that much, considering Ferrari have not been that good in the last couple Grand Prix, and Red Bull, have obviously won the last Grand Prix, or last two Grand Prix, and still look very strong. It just shows you how Sergio Perez, performing how he is, really is hurting the team still. McLaren in third. McLaren, though, only 26 points behind Ferrari, and probably won't happen this weekend, but probably by the time we get to the summer break, McLaren will be ahead of Ferrari in the championship, because Ferrari are clearly quite a bit slower than McLaren right now in Formula 1. Mercedes in fourth place, just under 100 points behind McLaren. Aston Martin in fifth, now over 100 points behind Mercedes. Remember, at one point, only a few races ago, they were still not a million miles away from Mercedes, but now they are way away from them. Racing Bulls in sixth. Alpine, of course, after the Spanish Grand Prix, where they scored 3 points, now up to seventh in the championship. Their highest position in the championship they've had in 2024. Good to see. And only 20 points behind Racing Bulls. Haas in 8th, Williams in 9th, and Sauber in 10th. By the way, shout out to Kevin Magnussen in the Haas, who finished the sprint in 9th. Haas definitely have got some pace. Whether they've got enough to be ahead of Alpine in qualifying in the race, we'll have to see coming up later today. But that is what happened in the sprint race earlier. But let's go through sprint qualifying, which again gave us a very good indication as to what will probably happen in qualifying later today. Qualifying getting underway in an hour and 20 minutes. So Max Verstappen ended up taking the pole position for the sprint race by just under 1/10 of a second ahead of the McLaren of Lando Norris. Oscar Piastri was a third of a second back in third. George Russell fourth, Carlos Sainz in fifth, Lewis Hamilton sixth. Hamilton called his qualifying, I think, a disaster, which wasn't quite that bad, but it definitely could have been better. Sergio Perez seventh, but he was horribly blocked by Ocon in the final lap of sprint qualifying. Ocon ended up in eighth, with Pierre Gasly ninth, and Charles Leclerc ended up P10, not doing a lap time in the final part of sprint qualifying because his car in the pit lane went into anti-stall, and then he wasn't quick enough to get around the outlap to start a final lap. So a shame for Leclerc there. But if we look at the top 10 and the top 5 teams right now in Formula One, for this weekend in Austria, Red Bull faster than McLaren, not a surprise for me. Even though McLaren, they've got a quick car here at this track at the Red Bull Ring, they still don't have enough straight line speed to be as good as Red Bull in that area. And as we know, especially in the first and second sector, that is very important. Now, unfortunately, guys, there is no sector time data present on the FIA website from sprint qualifying. So, unfortunately, I can't actually give you that data to look at in what part of the track were, a certain team quicker. So, we need to really guess going forward with what happened in sprint qualifying. But I would say, in sprint qualifying, the thing really separating Red Bull and McLaren was Red Bull, again, being quicker down the straights, but also those final two corners. As we saw in Barcelona a week ago, in the final two corners there that are very high speed, the Red Bull was the best car. And once again, in the final sector here, the Red Bull just too good compared to the McLaren. And, overall for the lap, it's not a lot that is separated them, as you can see, about 1/10 of a second. But it is just enough for Red Bull to be clear of McLaren over a clean qualifying lap. So Red Bull are the favourites today for pole position, no doubt about it. And of course, Max Verstappen is the favourite, not just given his own and Red Bull's pace, this weekend in clear air, but also, look historically at what Max and Red Bull have done here in the last few years. It's quite incredible what they have done. But Red Bull, they're not, I would say, clear enough of McLaren to the point where they can, kick their feet up and know that they're definitely going to be on pole as long as Max Verstappen doesn't have any major issues. Because Lando in the McLaren is close enough to upset Max. Definitely close enough to upset Max. And of course, remember, after the sprint race, the cars come out of Parc Ferme before qualifying. So there is some changes that McLaren could possibly make to their car that you never know might put them right on pace with Red Bull, if not slightly ahead of Red Bull going into this qualifying session. So it is still a clear fight for me between Red Bull and McLaren in the fight for pole position and Verstappen versus Norris. But Red Bull definitely, I would say, are the favourites. And again, not by miles, but they are, the favourites. I'd say 60-40 in their favour going into qualifying. Oscar Piastri looked good in the sprint, good defensive driving at times against his teammate, which some may say was, maybe not great for the team, but I don't think, after what happened with that incident at turn 4 where Lando went from first down to third, I think after that Lando was never going to come back and win the sprint. And Oscar, as long as he ends up in the top 3, then I think that's a good enough result for him. I think, in clear air, Lando should be quicker still than Oscar around this track. This is, of course, one of Lando's best tracks, if not his best track on the calendar. So I wouldn't be expecting Oscar to be ahead of Lando in qualifying, but top 3 definitely has to be an expectation for both McLaren drivers, and I'm pretty sure they can get it. Obviously, with Sergio Perez, way off the pace. And then after the top two teams, you've got Mercedes ahead of Ferrari. And as we saw in the sprint race as well, even though Sainz was able to stay ahead of Lewis Hamilton, Mercedes looked quicker and were quicker than Ferrari in the sprint. Not by a ton of lap time, but by enough per lap. And yeah, Mercedes a bit further off, I would say, Red Bull and McLaren than I expected. I thought Mercedes would be closer. I thought they would be maybe not as quick as Red Bull and McLaren, but I didn't think they would be, comfortably, nearly 3/10 of a second slower than even McLaren. I didn't think they'd be quite that far off. So that is a bit of a surprise. Maybe they can get a bit closer, but they look clearly the third best team to me. And then Ferrari, I thought would be definitely right up there with McLaren and Red Bull to a certain extent, because still have to remember the Ferrari car, has probably the strongest engine on the grid, which is something very important for a track like this. And even though they're having some aerodynamic struggles right now with, the upgrades to their car not working really at all, that doesn't hurt you as much at a track like this. But from what I've seen so far, they haven't shown any pace. Even though, yes, Leclerc did not do a lap time in the final part of sprint qualifying, he wasn't any quicker than Carlos in the first two parts of sprint qualifying either. So even if Leclerc had done a final lap, he probably wouldn't have gone ahead of his teammate. He probably would have gone 6th, maybe 7th. Which has led me to the clear conclusion at this point, that Ferrari are in deep trouble and something needs to happen before we get to the summer break when in regards to these upgrades. There needs to be some sort of solution, because they are going backwards in a, not just in a hurry, but they're going backwards at such a tremendous rate. As Martin Brundle, I remember him saying on commentary at the Canadian Grand Prix, in Monaco, Ferrari looked unbeatable with their car. The slow corners, high speed corners, the car just looked perfect. A month later, and their car looks bang average at best and not really good at anything. It's just quite incredible how they've dropped off that quickly. I don't know if it's, again, maybe it is upgrades that have done this, maybe a setup change that they need to maybe go away from and go back to maybe what they were doing previously. Maybe that's it. But Ferrari are in big trouble, no doubt about it. They are right now, at best, the fourth best team on the grid. And if they are not careful, Alpine, who are still comfortably slower than them at the moment, if Ferrari don't get their act together, that gap between them and Alpine will come down, because Alpine have got a lot more room to improve, I think, than Ferrari do. So, yeah, Ferrari are in massive trouble, and I have no hope, really, when it comes to Ferrari for really the rest of the season. I've pretty much given up when it comes to Ferrari now. Again, a month ago in Monaco, they looked amazing. They looked like maybe they could take on Red Bull and fight for the championship. But now, I don't think they've got a chance of winning the Drivers' or Constructors' Championship. And I think at this point, as we've seen since Canada, I think they're going to struggle to even finish on the podium going forward for the rest of the season. Especially if these upgrades that they're, continuing to bring to the car continue not to work. So yeah, Ferrari, big trouble. Big trouble for the Ferrari team. Perez, no surprise, miles off in pace, even though Ocon did hold him up in sprint qualifying. I don't think Perez would have gone any positions higher. He's still miles off his teammate. He ended up 17 seconds behind Max by the end of the sprint race, did Perez, in, a 23-lap sprint. So he was pretty much about a second a lap off the pace. How on earth, what on earth really can you do with that if you're Red Bull? So yeah, Perez just disgusting pace really from him. I don't understand how he's that bad. Um, as well, around a track like this, the shortest lap on the calendar, and you're that far behind Max. Like, how? How is that possible? Is he even trying at this point? I don't get it. I really don't get it. And then yeah, Esteban Ocon and Pierre Gasly in sprint qualifying completed the top 10. Alpine, very surprisingly, both cars in the top 10 in sprint qualifying. Now, they didn't have a good sprint race. They didn't have a great start, then couldn't overtake after that, which shows that still, because of their lack of power they've got, that's still an issue for them. But I think in clear air in qualifying, I do think they've still probably got the best midfield car. I think it's really between Alpine and Haas as to who has the best midfield car at this track. Haas, I think we could probably expect a bit more of a bounce back, let's say, in qualifying, so we'll watch out for them. But Alpine, very impressed. Very, very impressed. I did not think they'd be in the top 10 in qualifying here. I thought they would, because again of their lack of power, I thought that would probably cost them a bit too much to be really fighting in the top 10. But credit to them for getting both cars in there. And then, Leclerc obviously ended up in P10. And then the rest of the order in sprint qualifying, you had Magnussen in 11th. Again, great weekend so far for Magnussen. 11th in sprint qualifying. 9th in the sprint race. Did the best he could. Aston Martin, 12th and 13th. Another team that I have given up on. Just completely given up on. They are nowhere. Aston Martin, absolutely nowhere. Fernando Alonso ended up finishing 15th in the sprint. Was overtaken by Hulkenberg later on the sprint, and Hulkenberg, because Alonso went off the track, got a penalty for it, which was, just not a penalty, really. Alonso lucky to end up finishing 15th and not 16th in the sprint. Alonso clearly not happy with the car, and Lance Stroll not faring that much better either. That Aston Martin car is just a disgrace how bad it is. For a team with the money that they have, the infrastructure, and remember, of course, where they were at the start of the season. They were clearly the best of the rest. And even probably ahead, they were probably still a part of that pack of cars behind Red Bull of, McLaren, Mercedes. And, they were probably in there to a degree, you'd say at the start of the season. Alonso, I think, did have a 5th place finish in the second race of the season, where he was, the Aston Martin car was not quick necessarily, but they, were in that fight, and they were, in there with Mercedes. But at the moment, they're not just in the midfield; they're smack bang in the middle of it. The only teams they look quicker than this weekend is Racing Bulls, Williams, and Sauber. And they're lucky that Racing Bulls, with their upgrade that they brought at the last Grand Prix, they're lucky that Racing Bulls have not succeeded in getting anything out of that upgrade. Because if Racing Bulls did, Aston Martin would be quite far back on the grid at the moment. But horrible performance and horrible pace from them. And like I said, I've given up on them completely. I think they'll struggle to score points really going forward for the rest of the season. And I would not be surprised if Aston Martin lost 5th in the championship. Would not be surprised at all. Racing Bulls, again, they get their act together. They are only 30 points behind. And Alpine, who look very good at the moment, they are 50 points behind. And if Alpine can consistently put their car in the top 10 at pretty much every Grand Prix from now to the end of the season, then you've got to think Alpine have got a pretty good opportunity of catching eventually Aston Martin, who look clearly slower than the Alpine team. And then it was Tsunoda 14th in the Racing Bulls. The Racing Bulls looks better here, but still slow. There's been more details, by the way, on the upgrade package that Racing Bulls brought to the last Grand Prix in Spain. And basically, they rushed it forward in terms of when they wanted it to come to the circuit, and clearly that didn't work. So yeah, it might take some time, maybe a few weeks, for them to really get the best out of that upgrade package. Maybe we'll see a bit more of an improvement, let's say, at Silverstone. Logan Sargent ended up out-qualifying his teammate in sprint qualifying. Doesn't count as out-qualifying him on the official head-to-heads, but still good there from Logan Sargent, even though we know he's not going to be in the car for much longer. Daniel Ricciardo 16th, Hulkenberg 17th. Surprising Hulkenberg was so slow in sprint qualifying. Would have expected him to be basically where Magnussen was, if not getting into the top 10. Bottas 18th, Albon 19th, and Zhou Guanyu disgracefully in 20th place and half a second slower than his teammate. And by the way, Astro, the sprint race has already happened. So no, I'm not going to cover the sprint race because, like I said, it's already happened. So yeah, those are the results of sprint qualifying. What is, though, the pecking order going into qualifying? I would say, again, Red Bull just about ahead of McLaren. McLaren second, Mercedes third, Ferrari fourth, probably Alpine fifth, but I still think Haas will be close. So I'm going to say Alpine fifth, Haas sixth, and then probably Aston Martin seventh, Racing Bulls eighth, Williams ninth, and Sauber 10th. I think that's probably what I would go for the pecking order here in Austria. So with that, let's get into my top 10 prediction for qualifying today. Make sure to give me your prediction in the chat or vote in that poll to let me know who you think will take pole position here in Austria. And of course, I'll get to your thoughts soon enough. But yeah, let's get into my top 10. And of course, I've gone with my predicted gaps as well. So Max Verstappen, I think, will take pole by a bit of a closer gap than it was in sprint quali. I'm going to go half a tenth between Verstappen and Norris. Piastri in third, Russell fourth, Hamilton fifth. Leclerc, I think, will improve from the pace he had in sprint quali, where he was a bit slower than Sainz. I think this time he'll be just ahead of Sainz in sixth, Sainz in seventh, Perez eighth, Ocon ninth, and Gasly in P10. Even though I think Haas will still be close to Alpine, one thing that does help Alpine is having two very good midfield drivers. So I think that will help them get both cars into the top 10. But yeah, let me know in the live chat what you think is going to happen in qualifying, what your top 10 is, or maybe just give me your top 3 or your top 5. That's fine if you just want to give me that. Yeah, let me know in the chat over the course of the next hour, as qualifying is just over 1 hour away. But one more thing I want to get into before we start looking at some comments in chat and that. Let's just go through some upgrades that have been brought to the track this weekend. Now, there's not been a lot of upgrades. A couple of them are very minor for certain teams, but let's go through them anyway, just so you guys know. So the biggest upgrade package is McLaren, who have brought for both cars a new front wing and new front suspension. Now, those upgrades, those types of upgrades are not really going to be, the effect of those are not going to be seen here. The effect of those will be seen a lot more at Silverstone, but I think the most you'll see in terms of the effect of these upgrades will be at the Hungaroring in Hungary in 3 weeks' time. I think that's where you'll see whether this upgrade truly has worked for McLaren. But we'll see as well, I think, a bit at Silverstone whether these upgrades have done anything for the McLaren team. But yeah, this is not going to help them, I think, a ton at this circuit, which is still, as we know, power dominant. And then Mercedes, new beam wing. I think just trying to cut some drag, really, Mercedes. So, yeah, just a small upgrade there. New rear corner for Racing Bulls and a new beam wing for Sauber. So, yeah, the only major upgrade or major-ish upgrade is for the McLaren team. We'll see if that helps them any this weekend. But let me go back to this and get the countdown back up on the screen, as we have got 1 hour to go until qualifying begins at the Red Bull Ring in Austria. So make sure to get your comments in the chat. Let me know what you think is going to happen in qualifying today. And also, if you did watch the sprint race, make sure to comment what you thought of the sprint race. What did you think of the what do you think of the racing between McLaren and Red Bull? Do you think Lando was poor with his driving, where he allowed Max Verstappen the inside line back into turn 4 to retake the leads? What did you think of all that stuff? And yeah, just in general, what have you thought of the weekend so far? And also, if you want to ask any other F1 related questions, then go for it. As we've got an hour to go. Very nice hot conditions at the Red Bull Ring, nearly 30 degrees Celsius, and no threat of rain, and also no threat of rain for tomorrow either. There was possible doubt as to whether it would be dry for tomorrow, but looks as though it is going to be dry, definitely, tomorrow. Maybe not as dry as today at the track, but yeah. So let's get into some comments of yours in the chat. And as well, make sure to smash a like button if you haven't already. Of course, hitting the like button does help the channel grow, helps the visibility of the channel. And again, as I've said a million times before, it does help me see that you guys actually, enjoy the content here. So make sure to smash that like button. And subscribe, of course, if you are new to the channel. Bottom right of the screen, you can subscribe right there. And yeah, just to confirm, Astro, yeah, the sprint has been already run. With the new format, which works a lot better, sprint qualifying is on the Friday, and then the sprint race is always before qualifying on the Saturday. But yeah, I won't be covering any sprint races in 2024 on this channel, because my thoughts on a sprint race. I'm not going to repeat it for the millionth time, and it's just a waste of time. And even though earlier, we got some really great racing, McLaren and Red Bull in that, after that, in the first few laps, it was a very dull sprint, I have to say. So, yeah. And yeah, just looking on Sky F1, just to confirm, Max Verstappen's championship lead is indeed 71 points, which is too far for anyone to catch him up, I think, at this point. Hello to Nicholas, by the way. I hope you're doing good. Dinorio says, by latest results, safe to assume that currently McLaren has the fastest car, or the faster car. I don't think so. And I have to say, I've seen this a lot on Twitter. I don't understand by what metric people are using to say that McLaren have had clearly the best car on the grid in the last few races. I don't understand. And what I think people are doing is, I think there are certain people out there that are, and I'm not saying you're doing this, I'm just saying that these certain people on Twitter are doing this. These certain people on Twitter, what they're doing is they're misrepresenting data to enforce their own narrative that Lando Norris, is overrated, is nowhere near as good as Max Verstappen, etc. When, if you look, so since that upgrade that McLaren brought in Miami, and obviously they won the race in Miami, which, in clear air, I think McLaren in that race did have the best pace, but Lando did win from very fortunate circumstances. Let's not pretend otherwise. And then at Imola, I don't get why people say from that Grand Prix McLaren were quicker. They were not quicker at all. Red Bull were quicker in qualifying, just about. And for most of the race at Imola, Red Bull were faster. It was only the last 10, 15 laps where Lando was quicker. Just because he was quicker in those last 10, 15 laps doesn't mean McLaren were quicker during the race. If you look, I think, wasn't it by lap 40 or lap 45, Max had like a 7-second lead over Lando. And no, that is not all driver. That is, a decent amount of that is the car as well. So yeah, I don't get why people think McLaren were quicker there. McLaren obviously were quicker than Red Bull in Monaco, but so were Ferrari, and Ferrari had the best car. That's why Ferrari ended up winning. And then obviously Canada, Max and Red Bull were quicker in qualifying in Canada compared to McLaren. And then, in the race, yeah, McLaren in those wet, dry conditions when it was like, close to the crossover between switching from intermediates to dry tyres, McLaren did have the best car in those conditions, but that was only a segment of the race in Canada. Once we got to bone dry conditions, Red Bull had the best car. Again, not by much, but by enough. So, again, people, I think, need to realise that. And then if we look last week in Barcelona, I've seen lots of people say McLaren had the fastest car. In qualifying, yeah, I think McLaren did have a faster car, but in the race, I don't think McLaren were faster than Red Bull at all. The reason Lando caught Max in the second stint and the final stint as well was because Lando had fresher tyres, not because the McLaren car was half a second a lap quicker than the Red Bull car. Because if we look at the first stint, Max in the Red Bull, he passed Lando, passed Russell by lap 3, and then by the time the pit stops came, Max was, like 5-6 seconds clear, was it? Of the Mercedes of Russell in second, and Lando in third was not quick enough to even pass or even have a look at passing Russell in that first stint. Meaning that in that first stint, when both the Red Bull car and the McLaren car were on the same age of tyres, on the same compound, the Red Bull car was faster. And again, the reason Lando was able to catch Max up later in the race and make it closer was because of fresher tyres. It wasn't to do with Lando or McLaren having the best car on the grid. I mean, the McLaren was faster than the Mercedes, but it wasn't the best car on the grid in that race at all. And there was even data that I saw someone post that proved that McLaren did not have the fastest car over the course of that race. So I think what I'm trying to say is I think people need to look at the picture as a whole when it comes to data from, qualifying and especially the race. Because even if McLaren are for a certain part of a race quicker than Red Bull, that does not mean McLaren had the best car. In certain races, we've seen it over the years, some teams will be quicker at certain parts of the race than other teams. That's just the way things are. And, some weekends, certain teams have the best car in qualifying and then the second best car in the race. Again, that's just the way things are. So, McLaren, their car is good. No doubt about it. It is very good. It's very close to being the fastest car on the grid on a consistent basis, but it is not there yet. Red Bull still, just about by a tenth or two, have, especially in race conditions, the best car on the grid. And McLaren still need that extra boost from an upgrade to get to the point where they can be faster than Red Bull over the course of a Grand Prix distance. Brabham says, thank you, Chaz, for putting Oscar in the poll. No problem. Had to, because of course he was up in the top 3 in sprint qualifying and looked good, of course, in the sprint race. Astro saying, don't I reckon the Red Bull is still fastest after dominating last weekend? Paris just makes it look far worse than it is. Yeah, I wouldn't say the Red Bull car is the most, it is dominating at the moment, but it is still, again, in clear air, on the same compound, the same age of compound. The Red Bull car is still the best car in a race situation. And that's why you see me lately, when I do qualifying watch alongs. If I then go on to not do a race watch along, it's because normally Max has took pole, and I know that he'll have the pace to win, and that it won't really be much of a fight. But the reason a lot of people out there are trying to claim that McLaren have had like clearly the best car in the last few races is because there are a lot of people out there that do hate Lando Norris and think that Lando is overrated, that he's not anywhere near as good as people claim that he is. So there's a lot of people out there that have this narrative that, oh, McLaren have had the fastest car in the last few races, which is not true. And they're using that to prove that Lando Norris is nowhere near as good as Max Verstappen, which again is just not true. Lando is not as good as Verstappen. I will agree with that. But as I said a week ago, Lando Norris is clearly the second best driver in the world right now. And even though Max is still the best, Lando, he's not a million miles away from Max. So, yeah, I think he's getting a lot of undeserved hatred at the moment, is Lando, which I hope doesn't get too much to him. Bradham says it's so hard to tell which is the best car. Max might just be incredible, McLaren's might be as good. So hard to tell. Yeah, I mean, there's different ways, aren't there, of judging what or who has the best car. Maybe, I a few years ago I used to think that the performance of the slower driver was normally indicative of who had the best car, which in hindsight is the wrong thing to do because it's actually better to compare the best drivers in the best cars to each other to determine what the best car on the grid is. And so far this season, except for 2 or 3 races probably, Red Bull have had the best car on the grid. And that's why Red Bull have won 7 of 10 races this year, because still most of the time their car is the best. Not as dominant as it was in the first 5 races of the year where they were miles ahead of everyone else, but they're still just too good. They've still got that extra tenth or two in race conditions, which is why, as I said a few weeks ago, if you're going to beat Red Bull, you got to get the job done first in qualifying, because if you don't, then it's only going to go one way in the race, especially with Max Verstappen at the wheel. K Peters says, what other driver would be so far ahead in the Red Bull? Well, if you're saying so far ahead in terms of in comparison to Sergio Perez, I think there's definitely a couple drivers currently on the grid that would in the same car as Perez would be miles quicker. Norris, for example, Leclerc, Russell, Hamilton when he's on form as well. So yeah, I think those drivers would be clearly miles ahead of Perez, but would they be as far ahead of Perez as Max is? Maybe sometimes, but maybe not as much as Max is ahead of Perez by the amount he is. And that's why Max is the best driver in Formula One. Let's look at some other comments here for the next probably half an hour or so. The Woden says, but why as an F1 fan do you not stream when Max has pole? Well, it's because if you saw that I took a break from the channel a couple months ago, I said that, I would do content and do a live stream for qualifying and races when it looked like we were going to have a competitive qualifying or race. And if the fastest car ends up on pole, or let me reword that. If the fastest race car ends up on pole, we're not going to get a competitive race, are we? Even if the fastest race car is only faster by a tenth or two per lap, it's still the fastest race car. So that's why, if Max does end up taking pole today, I won't be streaming tomorrow, purely because of that reason. Not because I hate Max Verstappen and detest him, and I cannot stand him winning. It's got nothing to do with that. If it was clearly provable that McLaren and Red Bull in race conditions had the same pace, then I would be live tomorrow. Even if, Max was on pole, Lando was on pole, it wouldn't matter. But like I said, and as we saw in the sprint earlier, Red Bull still have a clear advantage in dry conditions on heavy fuel over the course of a race distance, whether it's 23 laps or 71 laps like it'll be tomorrow. So, yeah. And, if later this season McLaren get to the point where they do have a clearly faster car than Red Bull, if Max ends up still getting pole, then I would go live, because, again, I would know that, well, Max may have got pole, but he doesn't have the best car, and that's what makes things properly interesting. Hello, by the way, to Rooks in the chat. Good to see you, mate. Hopefully you're doing well. Nicholas says McLaren are starting to look good. Would be surprised if we could have a championship next between Max Verstappen, Lewis Hamilton, Charles Leclerc, and Lando next year, maybe for 2025. As we sit here now, midway through 2024, I would say next season, if, of course, Max Verstappen is going to stay at Red Bull, which I believe he will. I don't think he is going to go to Mercedes, at least not for 2025. I think most likely, if there's going to be a championship fight next year, it's going to be Max versus Lando, rather than Max, Lando, Leclerc, Hamilton. Because look at where Ferrari are right now. If Ferrari continue to not improve, they'll drop back and drop back and drop back as the season goes on. And that will affect them going into next season. It will put them further behind going into next season than they really need to be if they're going to supply Leclerc and Hamilton a championship winning car. So if I was to bet on a championship battle next year, I would say, yeah, Verstappen versus Norris is what I think the title fight next year will be, if there is one. But yeah, we'll see if that does indeed happen. Racing Prodigy says McLaren and Red Bull are equal. Max is just better than Lando. I mean, yeah, maybe in certain sessions they've been equal. I mean, you have to remember when I've said, in this particular session McLaren have been quicker, or in this particular session Red Bull have been quicker. It's not. I'm not talking like half a second or anything like that. It's been close. Like, for example, Imola, before Max started to his tires started to fall off a cliff in those final 15 laps. Before then, Max was probably 2 to 3 tenths of a second per lap quicker than Lando over the course of the race. Which is not that much lap time. So, I mean, maybe, yeah, you could argue that, but I still think Max is the best driver in the world. He is better than Lando Norris. I'm not denying that. But that Red Bull car is still very good and is still, I think, just about the best car. So let's not pretend like the Red Bull car is awful and the McLaren is miles ahead of everyone else or anything like that. Not that you are, of course. You said McLaren and Red Bull are equal. But there are people out there that like to pretend the McLaren car is miles ahead of everyone else, which is just not true. Brabham says Russell is too inconsistent. I think last season that was definitely an issue, but this season it's not been the only issue for Russell has not been inconsistency. It's been a bit too many crashes, which you could say is the same thing, but his results have been largely good, I would say, and have been largely the best really he could have got out of a particular qualifying and race, except for maybe a couple weekends here or there. And yeah, Russell's definitely had a better season this year than last year, no doubt about that. As we've got another 40 minutes to go until qualifying begins. I will make sure to post a link of the stream out again in about 10 minutes or so to try and get some more people here. But yeah, make sure to keep your comments coming in the live chat, and I'll answer more questions and answer any more just comments that you guys have in general. But what did I want to look at quickly? Yeah, just wanted to quickly look at Chris Medland's Twitter so Nico Hulkenberg, if you watched the sprint race, you would have seen that Hulkenberg late on up the inside at turn 3 past Alonso, who went off the track. He was a bit close, but it looked just about okay from Hulkenberg. And then Ricciardo was able to get his way through as well. But Hulkenberg was then given a 10-second penalty and 2 penalty points for what the stewards say was forcing Alonso off the track, which is a complete joke. And as someone actually put, an F1 YouTuber, Peter Brook, who you guys may know, he even said in the replies that, so Hamilton putting Max in the wall at 180 miles an hour is just as bad as what Hulkenberg did. That's how stupid these penalties are. How is what Hulkenberg did a 10-second penalty? How? What are the stewards on? Honestly. The Woden says, saying Russell is inconsistent when he is beating a 7-time world champion. I mean, yeah, he is beating a 7-time world champion, but that same 7-time world champion has been pretty poor this season. So, we do need to add in that bit of context. It's not like Lewis Hamilton has been driving at about his best or around his best, because he hasn't. So, we do need to factor that in with Lewis Hamilton. And Astro, by the way, I think Nicholas above was saying that he doesn't get why Lando or why people don't hate. Well, actually, wait, yeah, he said, and I don't get why people don't hate Lando. I think he might have mistyped. It might be a typo there. I think he might mean I don't get why people hate Lando. Maybe that's what he meant. If Nicholas is still listening, make sure to clarify what you meant exactly. Because, yeah, I mean, because of Lando's fan base online, which can be a bit annoying, and especially on social media, they are one of the most active fan bases, let's say. And again, I can understand if you find Lando's fans annoying and very like pestering at times. I understand that, but with Lando himself, I don't get a lot of the hate. Again, maybe you could say, "Oh, he's overrated," but I think people are overestimating how overrated they think he is. I don't think maybe you could argue that yes, Lando Norris is overrated, but it's got to the point where people are saying, "Oh, he'll never be a world champion." He's not one of the most elite drivers on the grid and stuff like this, which is for me just completely false. Um, the word says, didn't they get rid of the 5 second penalty? I think minimum is 10 seconds now. I don't know if the minimum is 10 seconds for racing incidents, but I do know in Spain that we had 5 second penalties for the two Haas drivers for separate incidents. I think for Hulkenberg, it was speeding in the pit lane. So, yeah. Polish Eddie says he's still regularly beating him, which I think is in reference to Russell and Hamilton. Yeah, Russell still beating Hamilton on a regular basis, which, I mean, even though Lewis, as we've said before, this current version, Lewis Hamilton, is not his best. Russell is still performing well, no doubt about it. Still performing very well, Russell, but not quite on the level of Lando Norris or Max Verstappen, I would say, with George Russell. But I think you could maybe argue that Russell has been probably one of the top 5 drivers of the season so far. I think Verstappen, Norris, and Leclerc, I think definitely have got to be in the top 3. And then after that, you've got what? Sainz, Russell, Piastri, probably the 3 options for 4th, 5th, and 6th. But as to who you put in what positions, that's a debate for a different day, I think. Yeah. Let me know whether you think Russell's been one of the top 5 drivers this season. I will be doing, and I think I announced this last week, and I'll announce it again, that, yeah, in a month from now, when we get to the summer break, I will be doing a special either video or live stream. I don't know yet. Might do a video instead. We'll have to see. But I definitely will be doing it. A mid-season review for the 2024 Formula One season, and part of that, I will be doing driver rankings, and the driver rankings will be from, the 21st driver, or in other words, the worst driver, all the way to who has been the best driver of 2024. So yeah, we'll go through that in a few weeks' time. Zook says Lando has shut his trap and opened his ears, and now he's ready to talk on track with Max. I think it's L says Max, Russell, Lando. Don't know if that's their top 3 prediction or that's just who they think the top 3 best drivers of the season have been so far. But yeah, if you haven't managed to make your prediction yet, make sure to post it in the chat before we get into qualifying in half an hour. And of course, that poll's still running at the top of the chat. And I'll make sure before we get into qualifying to remind you of my predicted top 10, which I showed a bit earlier, about half an hour ago. Yeah, only another half an hour to go until we are underway. The Woden says, so you mean rating the drivers between Logan Sargent and Max Verstappen? Yeah, pretty much. But what I'll do quickly is just post a link of the stream out again. And then go through some more comments, and then we'll get into a couple things before qualifying. Couple little things. I'll make sure to go through the teams quickly, do a bit of a roundup, and just round up my thoughts as to the teams and how I expect them to do in qualifying. And of course, we'll go through some key stats for the top teams before qualifying begins. Come join us here to Watchalong qualifying in Austria, where Max Verstappen and Lando Norris do battle for pole position. And there you go. So that's all posted. Hello to Vinster. Good to see you, mate. Says Max, Lando, Charles, Carlos, and George for quali. Bit surprised you've gone Ferrari third and fourth. I mean, that's probably what I was expecting them to perform like coming into the weekend. But yeah, they do not look good, do Ferrari so far. They look like they've probably closer to the fourth row of the grid for qualifying than they are to, third and fourth. Which is a shame, because it was only a few weeks ago where, like I said earlier, in Monaco, they looked unbeatable. They were regularly on the podium, up until that Monaco Grand Prix. And then since that win in Monaco, they have been nowhere. It's almost as if, you had the Leclerc curse in Monaco, and in order to get that win in Monaco, Leclerc had to make a deal with the devil, and the deal is that they must be shit now for the rest of the season. That's what it feels like, because since that Monaco win, they've been dreadful. Obviously didn't score any points in Canada and finished 5th and 6th in Spain, and don't look likely to be in the top 3 of a qualifying or race at the minute. But who knows? Maybe fortunes will change soon. Maybe they'll bring an upgrade that will actually improve their car. We'll see. But yeah, I'll read out another few comments, probably for another 10 minutes. And then we'll get on to some final things before quali. Vince is saying, took a little hopium this morning. No problem. Frank Trigg says, Max, Lando, George, Oscar, Hamilton. Would be great for Mercedes if they ended up getting into third. But even if they did get a car up in the top 3, I'm not sure they'd maintain that in the race, because looks like Red Bull and McLaren are clearly quicker than Mercedes in both qualifying and race conditions. So, yeah, Mercedes not quite as strong here, unfortunately, as we maybe thought they would be. Personally, I thought they would be very strong at this track. I thought they would be maybe even the main contender for Red Bull. I thought they would be that competitive, but yeah, quite a bit off where I thought they would be. But I'm sure there is a Grand Prix coming up where Mercedes will be able to do what they did in Montreal, which is take the fight directly to the Red Bull team. But I don't think that's going to happen here. Won't happen at Silverstone next week, because that track is going to suit the Red Bull and McLaren cars very well. Maybe not in Hungary. We'll have to see. Yeah. I think Mercedes, their car has improved a lot, which is great for us. But I think they still need another big upgrade if they're really going to get on terms with Red Bull and properly, on a consistent basis, fight for pole positions and race wins. So, still work to be done at the Silver Arrows. as on the Sky F1 broadcast, they're just doing a piece on Mercedes actually when it comes to qualifying. But let's have a look at some more comments here. Tarbo Power says, I think Red Bull, McLaren, maybe both, but most likely separated with a Mercedes sandwich. I hope Mercedes, like I said, I hope Mercedes can get in there, but I just don't think, from what we've seen so far, I just don't think Mercedes are quick enough as long as both McLaren drivers produce their best form, then McLaren should have both cars ahead of the two Mercedes cars. Right. Whilst I wait for some more comments, let me just go back to Twitter to see if there's any other bits of news from today that I can bring you guys. So let me just have a quick look. And just looking here at some comments from Charles Leclerc from the sprint race, who was just talking about his sprint race, saying the first lap was positive, and it was, but after that more complicated because he had to manage the temperature of his brakes, so wasn't able to really progress from P7 because he was having to manage the car until the end. So clearly a lot of bad luck and reliability issues with that Ferrari car this weekend. Remember yesterday in what do you call it? Yesterday in sprint qualifying, when he came out for his final lap in qualifying, the car I think switched off in the pit lane, and then he wasn't able to make it out onto the circuit. Well, he made it onto the circuit, but he wasn't able to get out there in time to do a lap. As I was just looking at the Sky F1 broadcast there, and I saw loads of cars piling out onto the track, and I thought, has the session started? No, it's just them reviewing sprint qualifying yesterday. So yeah, thanks there, Sky, for the scare. And yeah, Rook saying track limits don't seem as problematic this year. Have they clarified or widened the limits of the corner over last year? What they've done is they have shortened the curb around the exit of a lot of the corners, and they've included gravel on a lot of the exit of the corners. So track limits are not an issue this year, thankfully, because last year was a complete joke. I think there was only a couple drivers in the sprint race who had a track limit violation, which I think was Norris and Alonso, but those were, I think, were the only two drivers during the whole sprint race that had that. When, if you compare that to the 71 lap race last year, I think, half the field had a 10-second penalty for track limit violations. So, yeah. Not going to be an issue this year, thankfully, because they've redesigned the exit of the corners in a way that can't be an issue, really. Frank Trigg says, I reckon McLaren could nick the constructors with Perez not performing. It is possible. McLaren are, 70 odd points behind. And if McLaren could outscore Red Bull by, say, 7 to 10 points per race, then they'll do it. But it's just whether they can consistently get both Norris and Piastri to finish in the top 3, 4 with both cars. And if they can, then they should be able to close the gap to Red Bull and maybe win the Constructors' Championship. But as I said, they are still quite a bit away in the constructors compared to Red Bull, and consistency is key for McLaren if they're able to do that. It is funny though, because McLaren, the last time that McLaren won the Constructors' Championship was the year I was born, 1998. It's amazing that it's been that long, 26 years. And if you even, if you look in the, say, 10 to 15 years after that, there's so many chances to win the Constructors' title. 99, 2000, 2005, 2007, they probably would have won it if it wasn't for Spygate. 2008, 2012. Again, so many chances, and they just blew it continuously. And that's why it's been 26 years without a Constructors' Championship. And I think, 16 years now since they last won the Drivers' Championship, which, of course, their last Drivers' World Champion was Lewis Hamilton in 2008. Um, 89 points behind, says Rook. So yeah, tall order. Yeah, but again, if they can, increase their consistency and they can keep it up for long enough, then there's no reason why they can't close that gap down, because Sergio Perez is just simply not going to improve. So yeah, we'll see if they can do so. But I think what I'm going to do now, before I come back to some more comments from you guys, as we build up into qualifying, just going to do a roundup of the teams quickly before we head into this session. Again, if you haven't hit the like button yet, make sure to do so. We're on 25 likes. Let's try and get up to 30 or 35 plus likes if we can by the time we get qualifying underway. So yeah, let's just go through the teams quickly. So Red Bull, I think, again, probably a 60-40 margin in favour of them being able to get pole position today. I think overall they've got the best car for this track in clear air. So yeah, Red Bull look very good with Max Verstappen. Obviously, Sergio Perez looks awful. That's mainly Perez's fault. It's not, I don't think, the car. I think Perez just is performing extremely poorly in that Red Bull car. But as long as Max bangs in the laps and gets the best out of the car, then I think he'll be on pole position by half a tenth of a second. It is still going to be close with Red Bull and McLaren, no doubt about that. But yeah, Max, I think, still has to be the favourite for pole position. Ferrari not looking good. They look like the fourth best team here in Austria, which is it's just a mystery as to how they are that bad. I thought they would come here and be one of the best teams at this track. Remember last year they were the best of the rest behind Red Bull, quite clearly. But a year later they are clearly slower than McLaren and even Mercedes, who haven't looked that great this weekend, to be honest, but still are ahead of the Ferrari team. Also, bit of a lack of reliability from the Ferrari team so far, with Leclerc having some issues, which is not great. Hopefully, Leclerc doesn't have any issues during the qualifying session itself, coming up in about 15 minutes' time. But yeah, Ferrari, I think the best you're going to see from them is them maybe taking 5th in qualifying, but I would be surprised if they were in the top 4 on the grid. I'd be very surprised, because that car has not shown that type of pace at all this weekend. Mercedes, not quite as strong as we were hoping coming to this Grand Prix, but looks like they've got the 3rd best car, which is good enough for them. Maybe if Oscar Piastri is lagging a bit behind his teammate, which he was a bit in sprint qualifying, then maybe Mercedes can get a top 3 starting position, which would be great for them for tomorrow's Austrian Grand Prix. George Russell, the main man at Mercedes, by the looks of it. Not surprised. Lewis Hamilton has never really been super strong at this circuit on a consistent basis. So, yeah, I think George Russell will be the one to look out for from Mercedes-Benz if they do end up getting a superb result. McLaren looking good, but not quite good enough, I don't think, to end up on pole. Not as strong here as they were a week ago in Barcelona, which is not a surprise because this track suits their car less than one a week ago. But they should have, as long as both drivers get their best laps in, they should be second and third on the grid yet again like they were yesterday in sprint qualifying. Lando Norris is the only man out there who can take pole position away from Max Verstappen. Let's hope he does, because if he does, then we have got a proper race on our hands tomorrow in Austria. But Max, as I said earlier, it's more so in his favour, so Lando's going to have to do something quite special if he's going to get another pole position in 2024. Now into the midfield. Aston Martin, absolute shit. They're not going to be in the top 10 at all. Racing Bulls, their upgrade still isn't working. They look a bit better here, but still not quite good enough. Alpine, quite surprising their performance so far. Both cars got into sprint qualifying and they just look very good once again, which is really encouraging to see. Really just going forward for the rest of the year with Alpine. We'll see if they can replicate that again, but I'm pretty sure Haas will be a bit stronger today. Williams probably should be a bit better, honestly, around this track, but not really a surprise that their car is still one of the worst. Sauber have the worst car. And Haas, like I said, I think there is more in there for them. Magnussen was 11th in sprint qualifying, but as we have seen this season and in the last couple years, Nico Hülkenberg normally is quicker than Kevin Magnussen in qualifying. So if Hülkenberg can perform to his best level in this qualifying session coming up, then I think there's a pretty decent chance Hülkenberg gets into the top 10. So watch out for Haas. That car definitely good enough to get into the top 10. And let me just quickly remind you guys of my predicted top 10 for qualifying today, and I've gone with the gaps as well. Max Verstappen, I think, will take pole position by half a tenth from Lando Norris. Oscar Piastri, I'm going to go third, with Russell fourth, Hamilton fifth, Leclerc sixth, Carlos Sainz seventh, Perez eighth, Ocon ninth, and Pierre Gasly just about sneaking in for Alpine in P10. So we have got 12 minutes to go until qualifying is underway. So I'll just go through some final comments from you guys and then go through a final couple bits of stats before we get into qualifying. And remember that poll at the top of the live chat, that will keep running until the beginning of Q3. So you've still got time to vote on who you think will take pole position. And luckily for you, you get to see in Q1 and Q2 what the pace is looking like before you make a decision. But remember, pole position yesterday was a 104.6. So it's probably going to be a 1:04, but will it be, how much quicker will it be? We'll have to see. But that's, the lap time to look out for is a 104.6. Astra says Perez needs to retire. In my view, he's just wasting an F1 seat at this point. I mean, he is, but Red Bull have signed him up for next year, so why not continue round? I mean, he's still going to be driving the best car on the grid. And also Astra saying both Alpines in the top 10 yet again. They really have improved so much since the start of the season. They have been brilliant in the last few races, and now they seem to have found consistency in qualifying, which really can help them now move up the Constructors' Championship, because their race pace in the last few races has not been an issue. The only thing that's been an issue maybe is starting a bit too low down on the grid, as the Orange Army jumping up and down in the grandstands. Obviously, a massive Verstappen fan contingent at this Grand Prix. This basically is another home race for Max Verstappen. And they can't wait to see what will probably be another Max Verstappen pole position. Max has dominated this Grand Prix since 2021. And of course had a couple race wins here in 2018 and 19. It has been a brilliant place for those home, or not home fans, but for those Max and Red Bull fans. As McLaren just applying finishing touches to the Oscar Piastri's car there in the garage, as the drivers are just about getting ready to get in their cars. Astro saying, would love to see Piastri get pole over Lando for an all McLaren front row. Max third, Russell fourth, Leclerc fifth, Lewis sixth, Sainz in seventh. Yeah, McLaren front row would be brilliant, but it's going to take something quite incredible for that to happen, I think. As Daniel Ricciardo is getting into his Racing Bulls car. Had a decent sprint race, Ricciardo. Made up a couple positions after starting in 16th. Ended up finishing in 14th. But don't expect anything from Ricciardo this weekend, because this is one of the weakest tracks normally for him. He's never really, except for 2017, where he was on the podium, he's never really had a great weekend at this track, no matter what car he's been driving. And Astro says, Alonso 8th, Ricciardo 9th, Gasly 10th, my bold prediction. Hello to Crystal Racing, good to see you, mate. And yeah, Rook just reminding people in the chat that Pirelli have brought the 3 softest compounds for this Grand Prix. So, should see some flying lap times, and there should be plenty of grip for the drivers out there. Looney Classic says Lando does not need much to beat Max to pole today. I disagree. I know in the sprint, Max, or Lando rather, just kept within a second and then was able to get DRS and then have a go at Max. But I don't think it's going to be the same case tomorrow. I think if Max takes pole and maintains the lead at the end of the first lap, I don't think Lando is going to be able to have the same opportunity to beat Max that he did earlier today. So I think Lando does need to take pole. And maybe even if he does take pole, he'll, still end up not winning the race. But I think, if Max starts on pole and maintains the lead at the end of lap 1 tomorrow, I think Max just about has enough, as we saw in the sprint, that, what if he can get to the point of pretty much just about breaking that 1 second DRS barrier, then Max should be fine to win. But obviously a lot harder to do that for Max if you're not on pole. As Frank Trigg says, Lando has started to believe in himself this year. Well, of course, it does help when you have a much better car at your disposal than he does now, and has at least the second best car on the grid, and they are not very far behind Red Bull. But the F1 intro on the TV broadcast is now playing, which you know what that means. It's now time to get into qualifying. But before we do, just a quick reminder of the championship standings. Max Verstappen, 71 points clear of Lando Norris in second, Leclerc third, Sainz in fourth, Perez fifth, Piastri sixth, Russell seventh, Hamilton eighth, Alonso ninth, and Yuki Tsunoda in P10. And on the constructors' side, Red Bull are 63 points clear of Ferrari in second, McLaren in third, not too far behind Ferrari in second. And then you've got Mercedes fourth, Aston Martin fifth, Racing Bull sixth, Alpine now up to seventh, Haas eighth, Williams ninth, and Sauber 10th. But with the top teams, let's go through some key stats before this qualifying session. For Red Bull and Max Verstappen, of course, they took pole position at last year's Austrian Grand Prix. And Red Bull have taken pole in Austria 4 times since 2015. And all of those have been since 2021. So, yeah, recent history does favour Red Bull and Max Verstappen quite a bit. But Max's last pole position for a proper Grand Prix was back at Imola 5 weeks ago. I know he got pole position yesterday for the sprint race, but that does not count officially as a pole position. So again, his last official pole position for a Grand Prix was at Imola. Obviously, back in Spain, Norris took pole. In Canada, it was Russell. And then in Monaco, it was Leclerc. So Verstappen looking for his first proper pole position in 5 weeks. For Ferrari, they have some decent recent history here as well. Charles Leclerc and Ferrari's last pole position in Austria was in 2019, where they were so close to victory until Max Verstappen, with a couple laps to go, took it away from them. Ferrari, though, have only taken pole once in Austria since 2014, which was that pole in 2019. And their last pole position, Ferrari, was in Monaco. For Mercedes, for Lewis Hamilton and Mercedes, their last pole position in Austria was in 2020. Of course, a classic session in the wet where Hamilton proved at that time he was clearly the best in the world. Mercedes have also taken pole in Austria 6 times since 2015. So this is still a happy hunting ground for the Mercedes Works team. Lewis Hamilton, though, his last pole position still was back in Hungary last year. Can he somehow take pole today? And for McLaren, their last pole position in Austria was in the year 2000 with Mika Häkkinen, a race they ended up going on to win and get a 1-2. Can they do the same this weekend? McLaren have taken in pole in Austria 0 times since 2015. Lando Norris, though, looking for 2 consecutive pole positions in F1. The first time it would be the Lando has had 2 consecutive poles in F1. And the last time McLaren had 2 consecutive pole positions in F1, I think, was 2012. Not sure exactly what races, but I'm pretty sure it was in 2012. So we'll see if McLaren can be on pole yet again. But Q1 will be underway in a moment, and as usual, it's a 7 or an 18-minute long session, but I will sync up the timer at the 17-minute mark. As in Q1, we will be trying to knock out the bottom 5 slowest cars. As the temperature at the track, very hot. 31 degrees air temperature. That's 31 degrees Celsius for you Americans. That's Max Verstappen coming out onto the track. Yeah, very hot for the fans who are all wearing orange and white. And there is still a few out there wearing some dark blue or black shirts, which is a very brave thing to do on a day like this. But saying that, normally that would be something I would do, because I'm a black t-shirt kind of guy. As we've got a massive queue at the end of the pit lane. So clearly the driver's keen to get out there, and the session has started. And it'll be the 2 Red Bulls, the first 2 cars on the circuit. Of course, this is the shortest lap of the year, so lap times are going to be coming in left, right, and centre. So do bear with me in updating the order as we go along. As Verstappen already up to turn 3 on his outlap, shortest outlap of the year. And I'll get the timer up in about 25 seconds time. So the order or the drivers just slowly filtering out onto the circuit. And there you go. Timer on screen. 17 minutes remaining Q1. Astra asking, is the order here for the sprint result? No, not at all. Not at all. Basically, with the way the sprint format works now, is now that the sprint race is done, now we can completely forget about it and it has no effect on the rest of the weekend. So, yeah. But here is Max Verstappen, and yeah, because he was the man who took pole yesterday, let's see how close today he can get to a 104.6, which was his pole position time yesterday. Because that will really help us understand whether he legit can take pole today. Obviously, purple first sector for Max. He's the first driver to get to the first sector on a flying lap. As he opens DRS down to turn 4, Perez has actually done a faster first sector than Max. As through turn 4, Max comes. There's a bit of traffic ahead. But a bit too far ahead, I think, for Max to be actually distracted. As he comes up now to the final couple corners. Perez lost 0.6 of a second to Max in the middle sector alone. Just shows you how poor Perez's pace is. And here comes Verstappen to the line, and it's going to be a 106.0. So, as you can see there, 1.4 seconds slower than pole position yesterday. As Perez goes a couple tenths of a second slower. So, yeah, Max definitely could improve quite a bit as Carlos Sainz has done a purple first sector. Here comes Pierre Gasly, who goes up to third. Only 3 times on the board so far. But, yeah, these lap times will have to improve to get through to Q2. As Stroll goes 4th. Alonso now goes up to 3rd. As Ocon is now up to P3. As here comes Carlos Sainz, who goes a 10th quicker than Max Verstappen, and Carlos Sainz goes quickest. On a 105.9, what can Leclerc do? He goes half a tenth quicker than his teammate, and Leclerc is quickest. And here is Lando Norris, who goes second, just about slower than Leclerc. But again, these lap times are pretty slow compared to what they were doing yesterday. Piastri goes third. And then it's Sainz 4th, Verstappen 5th, Perez 6th. Albon is up to 7th ahead of the Alpines and Aston Martins, which is impressive. Here is Tsunoda, who goes up to 4th in the Racing Bulls car. So Tsunoda up to P4. Ricciardo has just got 8th as we see Hülkenberg slipping and sliding through the exit of turn 8, I think that was. Logan Sargent goes up to 11th. As here comes Nico Hülkenberg, who goes up to 9th, which is a good start to the session for him. So Hülkenberg P9. Kevin Magnussen goes 7th. Of course, we have to remember Magnussen has great pace historically at this circuit. Did finish 5th in qualifying here once in 2019. As Zhou goes 13th. His teammate Bottas only 14th. And then you've got Sargent 15th. And in the drop zone, you've got Alonso, Gasly, Stroll, and the 2 Mercedes. But the 2 Mercedes drivers have not done a lap time yet. So don't worry if you are a fan of the Silver Arrows or their drivers, as we've got 12.5 minutes to go in Q1. But yeah, lap times way off where really they should be. And the drivers that were getting knocked out in SQ1 yesterday, the best times they were doing was what? It was I think a mid 1 minute 6, which is about or 2/10 away from what Alonso, Gasly, and Stroll have done so far. So yeah, there is definitely quite a bit of an improvement to be found from a lot of the drivers. As here comes Lewis Hamilton. He's not really had a great race weekend here since he won here in 2020. Of course, though, when he won it was the Styrian Grand Prix. But, of course, same track. As Hamilton is a James Bond of a second slower than Leclerc in the first sector. That's 0.007 of a second, in case you're wondering why I said that. As Russell, a 10th quicker than Leclerc in the first sector. Purple first sector, so Russell already on it. As Sainz and the 2 Red Bulls are back out there on outlaps already. As Lewis Hamilton. Decent middle sector, but could be quite a bit better. As Russell, 2.5 tenths better than Hamilton on his lap so far. So Russell looking good. Lewis Hamilton not as much, but let's see what Hamilton can do as he comes to the line. And Lewis Hamilton goes 6th, but I feel like he could have done better. And George Russell, brilliant final sector, and goes 0.3 of a second quicker than Leclerc. And goes quickest onto a 1 minute 5.6. Brilliant lap time there from Russell. And that should be good enough to see Russell through to Q2. So, Russell first and Hamilton down in P7. Hamilton, apparently, according to Automotor and Sport, after yesterday's sprint qualifying, Hamilton broke his floor, which apparently cost him several tenths of a second. I don't think it cost him that much, but definitely cost him a bit. But still not looking comfortable in that car. As Max Verstappen on a flying lap. He's done a purple first sector as he's now into turn 4. Carlos Sainz now does a purple first sector. As Verstappen through turn 7 and 8 now. He's a 1/10.5 up on Russell. So this is a lot more like it from Max. And this should put him under a second slower than what his pole position time was yesterday. As Carlos Sainz does a brilliant middle sector. But here comes Max Verstappen, who does a 105.3 and goes quickest, but not for long. Sergio Perez goes 3rd. Decent improvement. And here comes Carlos Sainz, who goes 0.07 of a second quicker than Max Verstappen onto a 105.2. So, Ferrari on top for the moment, but still, we are quite a bit away from the best times of sprint quali yesterday for the top teams, as Pierre Gasly improves up to 8th place. As Leclerc goes back up to 3rd. Here is Alonso. Both Aston Martins, 19th and 20th. Not anymore, as Alonso goes up to 6th. Remember, this is not one of Alonso's best tracks, so don't be expecting special stuff from him this weekend. Ocon in the drop zone, but not for long, because he now goes up to P6. And next up, Lance Stroll improves only up to 13th. He's going to be in trouble because that is not a good enough improvement. But in the drop zone at the minute, Hulkenberg, Albon, Zhou, Bottas, Sargent. Albon, though, improving. Ricciardo improves up to 7th place. As Hulkenberg improves, but only up to 15th, which is definitely not good enough. As Alex Albon goes 8th. So he's into the top 10. As Lewis Hamilton down to 14th now, as Logan Sargent only goes 17th. Kevin Magnussen through the final corner. Surely he will improve. He does. He goes up to P9. Lewis Hamilton now the driver at risk in 15th place. As Tsunoda improves up to 8th. Here comes Oscar Piastri in 13th. He's done a purple middle sector. And he now goes up to 2nd, half a tenth slower than Carlos Sainz. The Piastri 2nd. Lando Norris on a lap. And looks like Lando's probably going to go 4th with this lap when he completes it. As Tsunoda has had his lap time deleted. So Tsunoda is back down to 15th. As Lando Norris is up to P4. But Lewis Hamilton now in the drop zone, and that is because Valtteri Bottas has improved up to 13th. And Tsunoda, is in 15th. So Lewis Hamilton is 16th and in the drop zone with, one run to go. With 5.5 minutes to go in Q1. This would be a disaster for Hamilton if he got eliminated. Hamilton, Stroll, Hulkenberg, Sargent and Zhou in the drop zone with that final run to come. As there is on the TV broadcast, Peter Bonington, Lewis Hamilton's engineer, looking tense. And we'll see who gets these final laps right. As we do see, track evolution is very big at a track like this, but certain drivers who don't improve by enough on their final lap are pretty much a guarantee to be knocked out. For example, if you're a Lewis Hamilton, if you only go up to 11th with your final lap attempt and everyone else behind you has not completed their final lap, then you can guarantee you're in trouble. But the two McLarens who are in the pit lane now, I think are safe. And I think the two Ferraris should be as well. But be understandable if they don't take the risk. But Lando Norris already back out on an outlap. As Lewis Hamilton is about to get back out there as well. As Aston Martin releasing Fernando Alonso into the pit lane. Alonso up in 12th, and he's at risk as well of elimination. Lance Stroll in 17th. Aston Martin might not get both cars through here. But Lewis Hamilton comes out of the pit lane, a pit lane exit where he once got a penalty for crossing the pit exit. But surely has the pace to get through to Q2. Just needs to let the car do the work, really. And it should be enough with his teammate up in 6th. And that car obviously easily quicker than the cars around him. The Aston Martin, Racing Bull, Sauber. As Hamilton just touring into turn 4. As there on the broadcast is Carlos Sainz, currently in P1 on a 105.2. So pole position, I think, is probably going to be mid to low 1 minute 4 in Q3. Probably anywhere between a 1 minute 4.2 and 1 minute 4.5 is where I think the pole position lap time will be. So we'll keep our eyes on anyone who is able to accomplish that or go even quicker. But here comes your 7 times world champion, trying desperately to avoid elimination in Q1 with his final lap. Let's see if Hamilton can get through. Surely he can. As through turn 1 he comes. Looks very comfortable through there. Hulkenberg has been noted for failing to follow the race director's instructions. Don't know what that's for. Hamilton, decent first sector, nothing special. Really, though, it is the middle and final sector are the only sectors at this track that really matter. As through turn 4 Hamilton goes and looked fine through there despite having a bit of traffic ahead of him. Now through to the middle sector point, and he is 3/10 up on Tsunoda in 15th. So if he has a good final sector, this should be enough to get through to Q2 as Pierre Gasly goes up to 6th. Lewis Hamilton, can he improve? Yes, he can. He also goes up to 6th, and that surely will be enough to see Lewis Hamilton into Q2 as Russell goes up to 7th for Mercedes. And we're now looking at Nico Hulkenberg, who's in the drop zone. Esteban Ocon is up to P7 now. Here comes Hulkenberg. Can he get his way out? Yes, he can. He goes up to 9th. Will that be enough? We will see. Kevin Magnussen next to cross the line. He goes 5th. What a lap from Magnussen. He's definitely through. Here is Daniel Ricciardo, who is currently through but needs to improve still. He goes up to 8th. Does Ricciardo. As now Alonso in 15th, the driver at risk. As Tsunoda through the final corner. Can Tsunoda get through? Tsunoda up to 8th. I think that might just be good enough for Tsunoda. As Alex Albon now the driver at risk, but Albon improving. So is Lance Stroll, who is in the drop zone. As Alonso also improving in the drop zone. Albon, he stays in 15th, does Alex Albon. I was expecting a big improvement there. That's why I was silent. Yeah, Albon improved, but stays in 15th. Lance Stroll has not improved his middle sector. Might that cost him a chance to be in Q2? It will, because he ends up in 16th place. Lance Stroll is out in Q1. What can his teammate do? Fernando Alonso, by 0.08 of a second, is through for now into 15th place. As Perez, currently 14th, as Sargent is 19th now. Perez goes up to 12th. And don't know, and I don't think the two Saubers are doing another lap. So Fernando Alonso, by the skin of his teeth, has got through to Q2. Incredible that I'm saying that. Aston Martin barely getting a car into Q2. That is how far they have fallen. But that's Q1 done with, guys. Let's go through the drivers that are on their way to the second part of qualifying. Carlos Sainz, Oscar Piastri, Max Verstappen, Lando Norris, Kevin Magnussen, Charles Leclerc, Lewis Hamilton, Yuki Tsunoda, Daniel Ricciardo, Esteban Ocon, George Russell, Sergio Perez, Nico Hulkenberg, Pierre Gasly, and Fernando Alonso. And knocked out, guys, in Q1, Alex Albon, Lance Stroll, Valtteri Bottas, Logan Sargent, and Zhou Guanyu. And yet again, Zhou Guanyu last on the grid, further proving that he should not even be on the grid, just like the driver ahead of him on the grid for tomorrow, Logan Sargent, who's always at the back. But Q2 will be a 15-minute long session, and I'll sync up the timer soon. But let's get the next bit of graphics there. There you go. The next cut-off zone you can see. So anyone between 11th and 15th. At the end of Q2, of course, will be out in those positions. But I'm expecting to see at the top, between Red Bull, McLaren, and maybe Ferrari, I'm expecting to see lap times that are matching the best lap times from yesterday. So that's what we're looking for initially in this Q2 session. Asterisk says Williams seem to be going backwards, at least relative to other teams. They haven't really gone backwards this season, Williams. They've just not really gone anywhere. They've not had the worst car this year, but they've just not really done anything this year of Williams. And if you remember, what was it? Around this time last year, they brought a massive upgrade. I think, was it Canada? Where they brought a big upgrade and it transformed their season. And it was the reason why they ended up finishing 7th in the championship, but they've not had that big upgrade yet. And don't know if it's coming at Silverstone. I hope it is, because maybe that can transform their season and put them where they were at times last season, which was, best of the rest behind the front teams. Because, this season has not been as good for them. But saying that, they have just announced a whole host of new technical people joining the team from several different teams: Aston Martin, Ferrari, Alpine. So a lot of technical people joining Williams, which is exciting for the future. But at the minute, we're not seeing any pace on track, as Alex Albon knocked out in Q1 yet again, second race in a row, where I think both Williamses out in Q1. Yeah, Williams and Sauber pretty clearly at the moment have got the two slowest cars in Formula 1. As is a replay of Albon and Haas at the exit of the pit lane. And Albon complaining maybe at the Haas backing up too much, but looked okay to me. Looked as though it was probably within the rules and what was agreed on in the driver's briefing. Yeah, Q2 will be underway in a moment, but that man on the TV broadcast, Fernando Alonso, I don't think has a chance of getting through to Q3, because that car is dreadful. He barely got through to Q2 in it. So, yeah. It really is a shame with Aston Martin, because we've seen, since the start of 2023, and obviously, they were so quick in that early part of 2023, we've seen the potential they have as a Formula 1 team, but they don't know how to develop a car. And until they learn how to develop a car and also learn that Lance Stroll is not a good enough driver, they will never win a world championship, no matter how high their ambitions are. As Lewis Hamilton down the garage thankfully got through up to 7th and ended up ahead of his teammate by the end. As there is Leclerc in his garage. Waiting for the signal that it's okay to get out there. Also interesting that Piastri was quicker than Norris in that final, those final laps McLaren did. Interesting to see that. Piastri was a couple tenths of a second quicker, which we haven't seen so far this weekend. So I don't know if that's any bit of carryover from the sprint. There is also one thing I forgot to tell you guys is reportedly Lando Norris not feeling physically that great. Apparently has a bit of a, I don't know if it's a cold or feeling a bit fluey, which obviously in hot conditions is really not what you need. But yeah, Lando physically, we hear, is not feeling great. As Q2 has begun. And the first cars on track, I think, are the Ferrari cars. Along with the Red Bull of Max Verstappen. So, let me sync the timer up in a few seconds. There you go. So 14 minutes remain in Q2. And we'll see if we get any shock eliminations, which we've had plenty of in qualifying 2 in 2024. As I think we're looking at a Ferrari here. Yet we are. That is slowly touring round, prepping the tyres for a flying lap, and it is Carlos Sainz, I think it is. Yes, it is. Who obviously was quickest in Q1. But let's see what he can do in qualifying 2. And whether Ferrari have maybe improved their car since the sprint race. Decent first corner there for Carlos Sainz. As he builds up speed towards turn 3. And not as good of a first sector as what we saw in Q1. We do have to remember, though, it is likely that these drivers are on used tyres to save compounds for Q3. So we might not see, the absolute best times immediately from the top teams until probably the second and final runs of Q2, as Esteban Ocon goes quickest for Alpine. Don't know what the lap time is. As Gasly goes second for Alpine. And Carlos Sainz goes or stays third, a 105.7. So yeah, definitely quite a bit slower. Half a second slower than what he did in Q1. Leclerc, though, goes quickest on a 105.5, but even that, I think, is slower than what he did in Q1. So yeah, Ferrari must be on used tyres. As here comes Max Verstappen out of his garage and out onto the track. And here come the 2 McLarens and the Aston Martin of Alonso as well. So Sonoda out on track now. As a bit of a jam here at the end of the pit lane. The Haas is wanting to get out there and trying to squeeze in our Haas, I think, between the McLarens, which I think they'll just be allowed just about to do so. Actually, squeeze in between Norris and Perez it was there for Kevin Magnussen, was it? Or no, Nico Hulkenberg. But now we're on board Max Verstappen, about to start his first flying lap of Q2. And we'll find out soon whether he is also on a set of used tyres. And here comes Max Verstappen to start that run with 10 minutes to go in Q2. Through turn 1. Understeering through the first corner there. Not quite hitting the apex, but was still good enough. First sector, nearly 3/10 quicker, so very good first sector for Max. And he's got a car ahead of him that will provide a nice tow of the Haas, which would have provided a tow briefly. As Max coming up to the middle sector point. Lewis Hamilton has also done a pretty good first sector, only a tenth slower than Max. Max now 5.5 tenths up on Leclerc through the first 2 sectors, so this is going to put Max into the 1-minute 4s. But still not as quick as what he did in in sprint qualifying yesterday. As Max Verstappen comes to the line, and no, he does go quicker. It's a 1-minute 4.5. What a lap. What a final sector. It was nearly half a second fully quicker than Leclerc in that final sector alone. I know Ferrari on used tyres, but still. A 104.5, and Max is quickest. Lewis Hamilton, 6.5 tenths down, goes second. And that is a marker laid down for the rest as Russell now goes second. Who can get anywhere near that? If you can get near that, you'll be fighting for pole. As Ricciardo goes ahead of Tsunoda and up to 4th place. Ricciardo looking good. As Piastri goes 3rd. But not quite as quick as what Piastri did yesterday. Piastri yesterday did a 1 minute, what was it? I think a 1-minute 4.9. Piastri can go quicker. What can Lando Norris do, though? Comes to the line and does a 1-minute 5.1, which is, what? 4/10 slower than what he did yesterday. So Lando has quite a bit more pace in the bag, unless he doesn't because he's too ill. So Lando up to 4th. Perez goes 5th. And who else have we got in the top 10? Hulkenberg up in 9th place now. As here comes Kevin Magnussen and Esteban Ocon on another flying run. Magnussen to the line, goes 11th and does the exact same lap time as Charles Leclerc. But Ocon, who was in the drop zone, goes up to P7. So both Ferraris, of course, on used tyres in the drop zone. But Carlos Sainz, presumably now out there on a new set of tyres, is on a flying lap. As here comes Sainz. And it's a decent middle sector, but it's nowhere near the pace of Max Verstappen. So this is not going to put him anywhere near the top. As through the final couple corners he comes. What can Carlos Sainz do? Well, he does go second. It was a very good final sector. A 105.0, but still nowhere near Verstappen. As Leclerc on an improved lap on fresh tyres. As Pierre Gasly improves up to 10th place. Leclerc through the final corner. Can he get anywhere near his teammate? He cannot. He's only a 10th away from his teammate, but he goes 6th. Does Leclerc. So, with pretty much all of the early runs done in Q2, Verstappen, Sainz, Russell, Piastri, Norris, Leclerc, Perez, Hamilton, Ocon, and Ricciardo currently on their way into Q3. But in the drop zone, with 5.5 minutes remaining, it is Gasly, Tsunoda, Hulkenberg, Magnussen, and Alonso. If Ricciardo got through to the top 10, that would be an incredible effort, I have to say. That'd probably be one of his best laps, if not maybe his best lap of the year. Because, yeah, he got 5th in Canada, but Racing Bulls were very quick that weekend. Racing Bulls have not been quick here, so if he gets into Q3, that would be incredible. As that's a replay of Alonso catching oversteer on the exit of turn 8, 9, I think it was. Yeah, that Aston Martin car handling horribly, which is why Alonso is in 15th. And it's a very real possibility that Aston Martin will start tomorrow 15th and 17th on the grid. But yeah, just waiting for those final runs. Again, make sure to vote in that poll at the top of the chat if you haven't already. Let me know who you think is going to take pole position. And for everybody watching right now, make sure to smash the like button if you haven't already. Really does help the channel grow, helps me see that you guys enjoy the content. And if you are new to the channel, make sure to subscribe for more content like this. As we've got 4 minutes remaining in Q2. And the top teams should, unless of a clear mistake, the top teams should get their cars through to Q3. It's all about Ocon and Ricciardo, whether they can stay in the top 10. That's Perez complaining about the Haas squeezing in front of the pit lane, which is a non-issue. Sergio Perez we're looking at is just climbing up to the first sector point. And Perez, if he can, I think if Perez can grab an extra 2 to 3 tenths of a second from this final lap, and that should be good enough from Perez to see him in the go through to Q3. But nobody at the moment can get anywhere near Max Verstappen's best time of a 1 minute 4.5. Is that an omen for Q3? I hope it's not. As here is Hamilton through turn 4 and 5. And Hamilton is a bit at risk. He's not that far ahead of the drop zone, but as long as he doesn't make a mistake on the final lap, he should be fine. As we're now looking at, I think, Esteban Ocon. And it is. In 9th place, starting his final run. Can Ocon make it through to Q3 here in Austria? He's always had a good record, Ocon, around this track. He's always been a point scorer. Always been in and around the top 10. Of course, last year at this race had about 1 million penalties, but looking good so far this weekend. As good first sector for Ocon. Now into down into turn 4, and looks good. As Ocon coming up to the middle sector point, we'll see then how good this lap is. And it is good. It's just under 4 tenths of a second slower after the first 2 sectors than Verstappen, as Perez remains 7th. Will that be good enough? We will find out. As Esteban Ocon comes up to the line and improves but stays 9th. So I think Perez might have just done enough there. Lewis Hamilton will in a moment when he comes to the line. As Hülkenberg, a 10th up on Ricciardo, who's in 10th after the first 2 sectors. Lewis Hamilton improves up to 3rd. That's definitely good enough for Lewis Hamilton. As Nico Hülkenberg to the line. Can he get through? Yes, he can. He goes up to 9th place. And Ocon might be in a bit of trouble by not quite improving, I think, that final sector of his. Russell now up to 3rd. And Russell matching Carlos Sainz literally for lap time. As Magnussen has not improved his middle sector, but there is still hope. As Max Verstappen goes even quicker. A 10th quicker until 1 minute 4.4. As Magnussen ends up in P12, he is out in Q2. A shame. Here is Alonso. Probably won't make it through, but we'll see what he can do. Only 15th. What a disaster for Aston Martin. Here's Ricciardo. Just misses out in 11th place. And now we wait for Pierre Gasly, who only goes 12th, doesn't improve his final sector. And I'm not sure about Yuki Tsunoda. Not sure if he's still on a lap or not. No idea, to be honest. But I'm going to assume, nope, he's entered the pit lane. So there you go, guys. That is Q2 over and done with. And on their way to the shootout, it is Max Verstappen, Carlos Sainz, George Russell, Lewis Hamilton, Oscar Piastri, Lando Norris, Charles Leclerc, Sergio Perez, Nico Hülkenberg, Esteban Ocon, and knocked out in Q2, Daniel Ricciardo, Pierre Gasly, Kevin Magnussen, Yuki Tsunoda, and Fernando Alonso. Great job by Hülkenberg. Great final lap to get himself in. Another brilliant qualifying performance by him since his comeback. As Gasly actually has had a lap time deletion, so Gasly will start 13th tomorrow. Also, good job by Ricciardo, out qualifying Tsunoda by a few positions. That's exactly what he needs right now, with him under pressure for his seat. But yeah, with Verstappen ending up, what was it, 5.5 tenths quicker than Sainz in second. Can anyone get close to Max? I'm not sure they can, but we are still going to find out. And Q3 will be underway in about 3 or 4 minutes from now. And of course, it'll be a 12-minute long session, which I'll sync up at the 11-minute mark. But let me conclude the results of this poll, where I asked you guys, who do you think will take pole position for the 2024 Austrian Grand Prix? 130 votes. Thanks for voting. And 63% of you have gone for Max Verstappen, 21% for Lando Norris, 7% for Oscar Piastri, and 6% for George Russell. And yeah, I think Verstappen's taking pole. I think, you know, this is one of his favourite tracks. That Red Bull car is very much on rails. And yeah, I think there isn't anyone who quite has a good enough car to get close enough, I'm afraid. But the only positive is Ferrari seem a tad better than they looked yesterday, maybe earlier on. So maybe we're going to get a bit of a stronger performance by Ferrari. One thing I will say, though, is I don't understand why McLaren have not shown, you know, a ton of pace so far. Again, maybe Lando is a bit ill, which we heard about earlier. Wasn't feeling too great. But, yeah. You know, McLaren's best lap time in qualifying yesterday, sprint qualifying, was a 1 minute 4.7. And they weren't even able to get into the 1 minute 4s in Q2. So, a lot of improvement is to be found by McLaren. Astro saying Perez seems to be there just to keep Max happy. No threat, minor tactical use only. Not good enough to threaten or provide much help with the constructors. Annoys me. Well, clearly Max, you know, likes Checo being at the team, feels comfortable with that. And as I said, I think last week, I think Red Bull signing Perez up for another year is to is for Max's benefit. It's to keep Max happy. But still, we wait to see whether anyone in Q3 can put up a fight against Max Verstappen. Sky F1 is just doing some analysis at the moment. And I've just seen a stat on Twitter. Aston Martin's fastest lap in qualifying at this Grand Prix, this same Grand Prix last year, was a 1 minute 4.8. Their fastest lap in qualifying this year, a 1 minute 5.6. They are literally getting slower. And we've seen, guys, teams where that's happened in the past. McLaren back in 2017/18 did that. Williams obviously did that for a few years where they were getting literally slower every year. If you start getting into that territory, you are especially fucked. So if Aston Martin consistently start doing that, they are in massive trouble. They'll be at the back of the grid in no time if they keep doing that. That is a shocker to be 3/4 of a second slower than you were last year on lap time. That is just... yeah. And I've already seen some people saying, oh, but the temperatures are high. That's not an excuse. But, yeah. Disappointing days at Aston Martin, but we've seen it coming. Ever since the start of the season, they've just got worse and worse, have Aston Martin. As we're looking at several onboards of different drivers, but looks as though we are about a minute or so away from the beginning of Q3. And of course, in Q3, there will only be a couple runs to decide your top 10, and most importantly, who will take pole position. As there is the Alpine of Ocon. Great job by Ocon to get through to Q3 ahead of his teammate Gasly, who normally Gasly is the quicker driver at this circuit. And yeah, Q3 has now begun. But especially great job by Hülkenberg, who maximised absolutely everything in that final lap. And if Perez has a bit of a fuck up, you never know. Hülkenberg could grab a top 8 qualifying position, which would be great for him. And you've got to say, Haas, I've got to fancy their chances to maybe take a point in the race tomorrow, which of course would be crucial. They are only 1 point behind Alpine in the championship, as work going on there to the Red Bull of I don't know who. It's Sergio Perez. Work going on to the floor area on the right-hand side from the cockpit. As there you go. 11 minutes remain in qualifying. And will it be an inevitable Max Verstappen pole position, or can someone take pole away from Max? The last man to get pole in Austria, not named Max Verstappen, was Lewis Hamilton in 2020 in that wet qualifying session. And then obviously a week before that, back in 2020, Valtteri Bottas took pole. That's how long ago it's been since anyone else other than Max Verstappen started on pole at this Grand Prix, as the cars now filter onto track. And the only team, like I said, I think that can realistically take the fight to Max here is McLaren, but it all depends on those first laps. Will Verstappen blow the competition out of the water like he normally does? We'll find out pretty soon. As Mercedes keeping their cars in the pit lane. So they're going to go out a bit later for their first run, which is interesting. And here comes Lewis Hamilton, who ends up taking his rear jack with him and then stops briefly in the pit lane. So a bit of a schoolboy error there by the team, but looks all fine to me. As I think Hülkenberg and Ocon may have already started a flying lap. So we'll see what they do in a moment. But yeah, Hamilton just taking the rear jack with him there. And a fan, I think. But thankfully it discharged itself. Yep, here we are. Max Verstappen. He did a 1 minute 4.4 in Q2. If he can do a 1 minute 4.2 or quicker in this first run, then I think it's game over. As thankfully for him, he's going to get a tow straight away from Nico Hülkenberg, who's just completed his first flying lap. As here comes Max Verstappen up to the middle sector. Oh, not the middle sector, the first sector. And it's a 16.3, which is good but not great. As Ocon now quickest. Obviously only 2 times on the board, Ocon and Hülkenberg. Lando Norris does a purple first sector. Good start for him. As Sainz now goes quicker than Ocon and Hülkenberg. Don't know what his lap time is though, so I can't tell you if it's good or not. As Verstappen, 45.0 through the middle sector as Piastri goes quickest. Lando Norris, a couple tenths of a second back. So Max just too good so far as he flies through the final couple corners to the line. What is that lap time? It's a 1 minute 4.4, half a tenth quicker than he did in Q2. Definitely more time on the table as Lando Norris does a 1 minute 4.7 and goes second. But that is 3.5 tenths away, which is quite a bit away from Verstappen. Here comes Leclerc, who goes third. So it's Verstappen first, Norris second, Leclerc third, and then Piastri, Sainz, Perez now 6th, Ocon 7th, Hülkenberg 8th. Now we wait for the 2 Mercedes drivers, who are not going quick enough to fight for pole, but where will they finish up for this first lap? Hamilton goes 5th, and George Russell, through the final couple corners he comes. Can he get up into the top 3? Yes, he can. George Russell goes up to 3rd. So 3rd and 6th at the minute for Mercedes, but there is one final run to go. But yeah, if you're a McLaren fan, I'm afraid that I don't think there is enough pace in that McLaren to stop Max Verstappen today, because even though Lando matched what he did yesterday, that is still 3.5 tenths away from Max Verstappen, who I think still could find probably another tenth or 2 if he needed to. So, good job by Norris still to, put it second, but Max still clear out in front. As the McLaren of Norris wheeled back into the pits. And all the cars back in the pits now, except for the 2 Mercedes cars, who will be back in the pits shortly. Yeah, in terms of the fight for pole, I'd say Max has got it wrapped up. Norris, as long as he doesn't, bottle his final lap, he should take second. And then the battle for third is incredible. We've got 2 tenths of a second, 3 tenths of a second separating the top, or 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, and 7th. which is the 2 Ferraris, the 2 Mercedes, and Piastri. So that's the battle to look out for this final lap. Because I think Max and Lando should be okay to take the front row. And Lando back in his garage looking through the data quickly before he gets back out there. Wondering how on earth am I going to find 3.5 tenths around the shortest lap of the year, which just shows you how, far ahead Max is. To be that far clear, 3.5 tenths of the next car around a short lap like this is incredible. It's, around a normal track, you're looking at well over half a second. As Leclerc, good lap by him to get up to 4th. Good response after what's been a poor weekend for team and driver. Not really because of his own performance, though. Yeah, in the next minute or so, we should get a load of the cars back on the circuit. And if you're wondering what the gap between Verstappen and Perez is, it's 1 second, which is incredible. Again, around a lap this short, to be a second slower than your teammate. Shouldn't be possible, but for whatever reason, it is, as Max Verstappen is already back out on the track on an outlap, preparing to take yet another pole position in Austria, ahead of what will probably be yet another race win in Austria tomorrow. As Verstappen just coming up to turn 3. And followed by the Haas of Hulkenberg, who his aim is to get ahead of Ocon if he can for 9th. As once again, 2 Mercedes cars being held back later than the others for that extra bit of grip. So there you go. As Lewis Hamilton, by the way, I think has been noted for an unsafe release because of that rear jack coming with him. So I'm not sure if not sure what's going to happen with that. Probably be a fine. I don't think he'll get a grid penalty. That'd be extreme, I think, for something like that. But, yeah, Max Verstappen preparing to start this final lap. As we look on board, the Australian of Oscar Piastri, who is not going to get pole, but does somehow need to get this car up onto the top 3 of the grid. Can't afford to be back in 5th. As Max Verstappen has begun his final attempt at taking pole through turn 1. Absolutely perfect through there. Up to the first sector point. Let's see how much better it is than the first sector he did before. Half a tenth better. So good start for Max. Not the cleanest turn 3 though. As Piastri, good first corner for him. We'll see what his first sector's like in a moment. And a 10th down on Verstappen for the first sector. But it's the middle and final sector which really matters. As for the middle sector, Max, not a personal best, but still half a tenth up on what he did previously. So still looking good for Max Verstappen. And as long as he aces the final couple corners, he should be fine. Here he comes through the final corner. Max Verstappen to the line. And he does a 1 minute 4.3. Almost half a second clear of Lando Norris. And surely that is way too good for anyone else to beat. As Hulkenberg goes up to 8th. Here comes Piastri. Can he get into the top 3? He goes onto the front row, but only for now. As Carlos Sainz goes 4th. So, out-qualified by the two McLarens is Carlos Sainz. Lando Norris has not improved his first sector, but has improved his middle sector. Can he get back ahead of his teammate? Through the final corner to the line. Yes, he can by a few hundredths of a second. Lando Norris back on the front row for now as Leclerc has not improved his middle sector, as Verstappen has been noted for driving unnecessarily slowly at the pit exit. We'll see what happens with that as Leclerc goes slightly wide in the penultimate corner and goes now off the track through the final corner. That won't cause the yellow flag though, so Leclerc is done. Poor final attempt from Leclerc. Here comes Lewis Hamilton. Can he improve on 7th? Yes, he can. He goes up to 5th. But what about his teammate, George Russell? Round the final corner. And Russell goes 4th. So pretty much replicating much of the top 10 from yesterday. Russell 4th, Sainz 5th, Hamilton 6th in that area of the field. But yet again in 2024 and just life in general, Max Verstappen ends up top. Pole position for the Austrian Grand Prix is here's a 1 minute 4.3 for him as Oscar Piastri has had his lap time deleted and Piastri has fallen down to 7th place. So, Max is on pole, 4 tenths clear of Norris. In second, Russell will now start 3rd. Sainz 4th, Hamilton 5th, Leclerc 6th, Piastri down to 7th. What a disaster for him. Perez 8th, Hülkenberg 9th, Ocon in 10th. And then the rest of the order, Ricciardo 11th, Magnussen 12th, Gasly 13th, Tsunoda 14th, Alonso 15th, Albon 16th, Stroll 17th, Bottas 18th, Sargent 19th, and Zhou Guanyu 20th and last. So, an exciting grid outside of the top 2. But Max Verstappen miles out in front and will not be stopped tomorrow. Unless he gets a penalty for driving unnecessarily slowly on the pit lane exit, which I don't think he will. I'd be very surprised if that was to happen. So there you go. That is the end of qualifying. And yeah, let me know what your thoughts are coming out of qualifying. One thing I can announce is I will not be doing a race watch along tomorrow because, yeah, Max Verstappen is going to win the race tomorrow. That is pretty clear. And nobody can stop him. Might be a decent fight for the podium, but I don't think we're going to get much of a great race tomorrow, really. McLaren just don't have the pace, I'm afraid. But let me ask, who is your driver of the day for qualifying in Austria? For me, there is only one clear winner, but I'll ask you guys anyway. So, Max Verstappen is one of your pole options. Lando Norris. George Russell. And I'll go Nico Hülkenberg in there as well. But for me, clearly, driver of the day is Max Verstappen. 4 tenths clear of second place in qualifying at this track is mental. That is one of the... Maybe, I won't even say one of. I think that is by far the best pole position lap we've seen this year. Maybe in the last couple years. That is stupidly great from Max Verstappen today. And the thing is, that middle sector, he didn't even improve on that final lap, so he could have been even quicker. So there you go. Let me know what you thought of qualifying. Astro says, driver of the day for me, Hulk doing the best in the worst car out of the options here. Astro Yali is saying, sigh, Max yet again. Well, when you're the best driver in a car that's just about the best, there is only one outcome, I'm afraid. Vinster says a full second after 65 laps is a full lap. Prepare for a 20-second lead at the finish tomorrow. I think tomorrow, I don't think it'll be, I don't think Max is going to pull away at half a second a lap or anything. But I do think that Max will probably win the race tomorrow by probably about 17, 18 seconds, I reckon. At best. I think the smallest the gap will be tomorrow is probably around 10 seconds. That's if Max and Red Bull really have to conserve the engine, because I know there is concerns with their power units. Because obviously Max had a bit of an issue in Canada with the power unit. Obviously here in Austria as well. And they have a bit of a concern, Red Bull, about the amount of power units they've got left before Max needs to take a penalty. So they might be very conservative tomorrow once they get a bit of a lead built. But yeah, somewhere between 10 and 17 or 18 seconds is the race winning gap it'll be in the end for Max. Todd says the first 5 laps should be spicy. Maybe. I think the main fight to look out for tomorrow is Russell, Sainz, Hamilton, Leclerc, Piastri, Perez for 3rd down to 8th. I think that's the main fight tomorrow. I think Max is going to win comfortably. Lando will finish in 2nd. And then God knows who finishes in 3rd. I'd probably favour Russell, to be honest, to finish in 3rd. Because Piastri, even though he's in the 2nd best car, he's a bit too far down on the grid. Plus, McLaren can't really overtake as well with their car because their car is quite slow down the straights. So, yeah, I would favour Russell to grab that podium. But you never know. You never know. Maybe Hamilton or Leclerc could take the podium. Jamie Todd says, would he have still got pole anyway, since I don't think anyone beat his Q2 time? Yeah, his Q2 time was still quicker than what the rest did. That's how far ahead Max has been today. Rooks asking, what time did they lose in the pit lane here? About 22, 23 seconds is pit lane loss. I think tomorrow, I think you'll see probably a 2-stop race tomorrow. So, yes, I think, we could get a decent race tomorrow. I'm not saying it's going to be like an awful race, but I just don't think we're going to have a fight for the win. I think that's going to be, all settled, unfortunately. Could Russell repeat Spanish start and lead early? No, because it's too short of a run down to turn 1, unfortunately. The only way Russell's going to get into the lead tomorrow is if Max and Lando go side by side on the first lap tomorrow and end up, busy watching each other, and that, ends up forcing or allowing Russell to take advantage. But I think with Max, as long as he holds Lando off on the first lap and then gets on with building over a second's lead to Lando, then I think Max wins the race pretty comfortably. Let me see if I can find some other comments here. Ken Wallace says Red Bull still got the best car, no doubt. Absolutely. Can have no doubt about that. But McLaren they're still not far away. We have to remember with McLaren, this track doesn't suit their car as well as, your Circuit de Cataluñas or like Silverstone will be going to next week. So we have to remember that with McLaren. But yeah, McLaren's still just a bit too far away to seriously trouble Red Bull on a consistent basis. Al says Lando got a chance for P1. No, I don't see it. Even if Lando gets ahead on the first lap, if Max stays in second, then Max should have the speed to come back at Lando. Plus, we know the Red Bull is a lot quicker down the straights, so I don't see how Lando can keep Max back. That Red Bull is just way too quick in a straight line for the McLaren. So Max will have to have, like, you guys remember that start he had in 2019 when he went from like second down to 10th? He'll have to have a start like that for Lando to have a chance to win. Because even if Max loses at 1 position, 2 positions, maybe even 3 positions, I still think Max has enough pace to come through and win. It's just not... This is not McLaren's weekend. This is Red Bull's weekend. And it's for them to bow down to their superiors. Thoughts on Ricciardo today and his future? I mean, today, good performance. Maybe you could argue he should have got into the top 10, but I mean, he, beat his teammate and got a better than expected result. If he can nick a point tomorrow and beat his teammate, then that would be great. In terms of his future, it's not looking great. Liam Lawson looks like he's being, prepared for a full-time takeover of that seat, which, to be honest, I'd like to see, because I know Ricciardo, is not a long-term option, and Ricciardo still consistently is not performing, to the level that we hope and we know he can perform at when he's at his best. So yeah, we'll see. We'll see what happens. These next, 3-4 races before the summer break will decide Ricciardo's future. But one thing I will say is if Ricciardo does lose his seat, that's him done in Formula 1, 100%. He'll never be seen again. And I'm hoping he'll either maybe join WEC, but most likely, or more likely, I'm hoping he'll join IndyCar, because I think he would be perfect for the IndyCar series. Todd says lots of DRS at this track. I hope we see some detection line strategy like last year. Yeah, we did see that last year with, was it Sainz and Perez? Where Sainz kept making sure he was behind on the detection point to get the DRS down to the next corner. I'm sure we'll see that tomorrow, but yeah. As I said, I won't be streaming tomorrow because I don't think we're going to get that great of a race, and I think we're going to see not really that much of a battle for the lead, I'm afraid. I think Max Verstappen will just cruise to victory. But, of course, there is a Grand Prix next week at Silverstone, where I think we could see McLaren possibly on pole there, because I think that track suits their car much better than this one. So, don't count McLaren out. Vincent says Danny is done. You can see it in his eyes. And even Laurie Ristoga says I'd rather have Bottas than Ricciardo at Haas, to be honest, which I think is a bit of a bit harsh. I wouldn't say he's been that bad, Ricciardo, but yeah, Ricciardo definitely getting to those last few embers of his career, I'm afraid. But that is it, guys, for this qualifying watch along. Thank you guys very much for coming along. Let me just finish up this poll in the chat. 28 votes for who is your driver of the day for qualifying in Austria, and 71% of you have gone for Max Verstappen, so no surprise there. 10% have gone for Lando Norris, and also 10% have gone for George Russell, and then 7% Nico Hulkenberg. But yeah, guys, thank you very much for coming along to this qualifying watch along. As I said, I will not be live tomorrow because I don't think we're going to get a competitive, exciting fight for the lead, so I'm going to give tomorrow a rest, but I might be back at Silverstone. Remember, I might be back at Silverstone. No guarantees. We'll see what happens in practice on Friday first as to whether I will go live or not. And if it looks like we're on for a fight, then I will be back here next Saturday and maybe next Sunday as well. So yeah, we'll see when I next see you guys. Thanks for coming along for today. Thank you if you've hit the like button. Massively appreciate it. If you're a new subscriber, thank you so much. Great to have you. And before you go, if you haven't subscribed or hit the like button, make sure to do so. Yeah, thank you guys for coming along. It's been great to have you on this hot Saturday. And yeah, make sure to keep around or keep updated on the Discord server. Also, you've got my channel community page, and of course, when I know when I'm going to be going live, I will let you guys know. Don't worry about that. But yeah, that's been it for qualifying, guys, for the Austrian Grand Prix. And until my next live stream, whenever that is, it has been me, Chazza HD. Goodbye.